All right, well, I want to thank you for coming tonight to just a very general overview of distance learning and kind of some best practices thrown in there as well. This is general to avoid a couple of different things. So first of all of you are teaching different courses, and so there's a different pedagogy and different instructional strategies kind of related to all of those courses. And so I don't necessarily want to just focus on one subject or one department or one class or course, and instead just want to kind of provide an overview of, hey, this is the big picture. This is what I want to try to accomplish with your students. And you're going to hear me say one word in particular a lot tonight, or some variation of this particular word, and that's presence. I want you to have strong pedagogy. I want you to think in terms of how can you make activities more interactive, how can you kind of help your students work at a flexible pace, but also still getting all the material that you believe is important for this particular class. But also, you can cure a lot of poor pedagogy in an online course by just being present and being available and making sure that you are kind of constantly in communication with your students. So you're going to hear me say that a lot tonight. But ultimately, hopefully this session will kind of be informative for you. I would encourage you, if you do have additional questions, to please follow up with either myself, and I'm going to introduce myself in just a second, or anybody in our IT or instructional technology or faculty development offices. They will be glad to help you. So to try and kind of transition into a little bit of an introduction, my name is Michael Strauser. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Communication, as well as an instructional designer for online projects. And I get a course release to do that, so I kind of try to help any faculty member who wants to either put a course online or who's been given a directive that a program is going online. And so one of the things that I focus on specifically is just really kind of taking what you're either already doing in the face-to-face course or maybe have never done in a face-to-face course and transitioning that into an online environment. I would say that in terms of expertise, instructional strategy and pedagogy would be my expertise. I have a PhD from UK in instructional communication, so that's kind of a bridge between education and the communication disciplines. But if you do have specific tech questions, we have a great staff. Dr. Sean Apostle, especially, who is also in the School of Communication, is great when it comes to questions about our LMS, which is Moodle. And so if you have additional questions in that regard, I would encourage you to reach out to him. But in terms of actually planning your course and doing course design and curriculum development, I can be of service in that regard. So let's get started. So here's just a little bit of an overview of where we're going to go today. So first, we're going to look at a little bit of a theoretical context. I want to kind of present to you just a little bit of a picture of who your students are today, because the millennial learner is different. The 21st century student is different than any student we have seen previously. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a theoretical context. And then second, we're going to look specifically at some practical implications. And that's honestly, if I had a heart for tonight, that would be that you would be able to walk out of this session and go, this is exactly what I need to do, or at least these are the areas that I need to think about as I transition my course into an online environment. So I wanted to read this quote, and I typically don't try to use too much text on my slides, but I did want to put this entire quote up, and I'm going to read through this because I do think this is important. So this is from an edition of the Chronicle, I believe, in 2013. A well-designed, student-centered online course can improve student learning and teach students life skills across a much broader spectrum than a face-to-face course ever could. I think every student should be required to take at least one online course as part of his or her formal education. And I present that to say that, I understand. I'm still relatively young in terms of entering higher ed and kind of figuring out my place, but I have an old soul. And my particular learning style is that of I enjoy lecture. I enjoy taking notes while someone is lecturing. And have found that I actually retain more information that way compared to doing or compared to reflective thinking. So it's easier for me to kind of grasp onto material as someone is kind of that sage on the stage and projecting, and then I can write down snippets that I feel are important. But what we're seeing now is a little bit of a transition in terms of the paradigm shift. And one thing that we're recognizing is, and this is not to diminish lecture, one of the things we're recognizing is that learners today do not necessarily grasp as much in terms of content and do not necessarily have an enhanced learning mechanism when you are just focusing on one particular strategy. So if you are just focusing on lecture, your students as a whole will probably not retain as much. One thing that I like about the online environment, and Holly Bell's quote kind of reinforces this, is that it's a creative, innovative environment if you allow the barrier of fear to kind of be relinquished a little bit. And I think a lot of times we allow online learning and distance education to kind of just allow us to be fearful, because either we are experiencing something unknown. Maybe we've never been students in an online environment. Maybe we've never taught an online or a blended course before, something that's face-to-face and online. But we allow fear to creep in a lot. And I'm just here tonight to try to encourage you, help you, remind you that this is not nearly as scary as you probably think that it is. And also, I would encourage you to kind of think through that this is probably not as difficult as you think it is in the moment. A lot of times the most difficult steps involved in this process are kind of figuring out how to work Moodle or how to work a learning management system, even more so than pedagogy. But I do want to just kind of talk about the fact that I do recognize it's a paradigm shift, and it's a different way of thinking probably than you've ever thought before. And so we have to kind of strap on our creative helmets and say, what am I supposed to do? This is completely different. I understand that. So here is the modern day 21st century college student. Not much has changed since Bluto was kind of having a lot of issues at Animal House. But there is one thing that has changed. Millennial students, so our 21st century learner, desires active, engaged, and collaborative learning environments. So like I said, I'm an old soul. I appreciate that lecture. I appreciate someone kind of talking from the front and saying, hey, this is what you need to know, and kind of latching on to nuggets as a result. 21st century students look at that and go, okay, that's great. I can get that information by Googling it. So what can I do in this particular environment, and what return on investment can I take away from this time that we have together that I can't get just by Googling something or looking it up on the internet? And so they don't just want content transfer anymore. They don't just want information transfer. They want to do. They want to be active. They want to learn in community with others. And at the end of the day, too, they want to experience their learning. And in some ways, I commend that they don't just want to be receptacles of information anymore, but they actually want to be producers. And we should respect that as well. But this is also kind of the flip side of our learners. And so we aren't necessarily so idealistic that we don't recognize that they're having other thoughts as well. But also, we have a lot of students who look at the online environment and assume that it's easier, even though studies have proven that it's not. And so Bluto would say, you mean I don't even have to go to class? Sounds great, sign me up. But an online learning environment is drastically different than just a student thinking I don't have to go to class and therefore this is what I'm going to do. And so as we go through with this, we're not going to focus a lot on this, but if nothing else, I wanted to present an overview of some different learning styles to kind of say that, look, you cannot just take your online course and assume it's going to be identical as your face-to-face course, and neither can your student. There's kind of a dual responsibility here with you and your student as you both kind of try to achieve success in an online environment. There are a variety of different articles that talk about learning styles. The two that I'm going to position today are just kind of some different things, overviews you can think of to just kind of help you get a picture of your students. But ultimately, we have a kind of a variety of students. We have students who can learn by watching and observing, students who learn through critical reflection and critical thinking and true analysis. We have students who learn by doing, and so they really want that hands-on experiential, and then also students who learn by feeling, right? So there's some semblance of that effect or motivation that's kind of brought up in that passion. Because of this, and because we do have a variety of learning styles and a variety of students with a variety of learning styles, we cannot just take all of our students and kind of put them into one box. We cannot just sit there and say that, maybe we do have one student who encompasses a variety of different learning styles or, learning preferences. But we cannot just assume that every student in our class is going to be the same. And so we have to think creatively, which also makes the online environment a little better because we can kind of utilize different tech tools and some things that we may not have utilized in our face-to-face course to really get the content across. This is another way to kind of think about this, but ultimately you're seeing those same themes, this feeling, watching, thinking, doing, in terms of kind of how students funnel through this information. So I think this is important. This requires you to be innovative. This requires you to think beyond lecture. One of the things that I hear routinely with professors who are teaching an online course is that they look at me and they say, actually I start and I ask the question, in an ideal world, if you had all of the resources available, what would you do in this course? Tell me some strategies that you would want to do. Sky's the limit. And typically here are the two things that I hear from faculty. The first is, well, I would really love to do recorded PowerPoint lectures. And I go, okay, well that's great. Well, how long are you thinking for those recorded PowerPoint lectures? And they go, well, usually my lectures in class are between an hour to 2 hours, depending on the time. So probably that frame. And my skin kind of crawls a little bit. I cringe. And that's not to say that recorded PowerPoint lectures are not great. I'm going to tell you a little bit about a tool later called Microsoft Mix that does allow you to go through a PowerPoint and record yourself talking about it, so you're actually on the screen with the material. It's not a bad thing to do, but literature tells us in terms of online learning that you don't want to bombard your students with a 2-hour lecture. In fact, probably 10 to 15 minute snippets is going to be better. And one of the things that I also want to reiterate to you today is that there are other ways to get content across beyond just you talking about it, which in this particular session I'm not doing a great job of that. But you can get information across to your students without just being that sage on the stage and that oracle of wisdom. We have so many different tools at our disposal, so many different resources at our disposal that have never necessarily been available to any generation before us. And so that allows us, I believe that's liberating for us, so that we are not necessarily kind of this final know-it-all, right? But instead we're a facilitator of learning to a certain extent. So hopefully this was helpful, at least in kind of painting a portrait and creating a context for your particular students. So here are a couple theoretical principles that I latch onto when I try to design online or blended courses. Some of you may not just be working on purely online courses. Maybe you do want to do something where you have kind of a blend, a hybrid. I'm actually a strong proponent of blended courses. I think you can kind of blend the best, literally blend the best of both worlds in that regard. But these are kind of the two theories that I grab onto in terms of planning my classes. The first is active or experiential learning. And so ultimately what this is kind of learning by doing. So you're getting students out, you're having them engage with the material beyond just reading the material or listening to the material, but they're actually doing activities. And we can see enhanced performance, improved student learning, as students are kind of getting their hands dirty and getting in the trenches and kind of moving through those steps of making the principles active. And it kind of helps cement them or make them more concrete. Second, and this is one that I'm still trying to figure out, what does this look like in my online classes, but significant learning. And it's not enough for me just to see content transfer. I also want to see my students grab the material and latch onto the material and be passionate about the material. And to put it very bluntly, I think this is probably the most difficult thing to do in an online course, because a lot of times in face-to-face classes, you are the receptacle also of passion. You're the transferer of passion. And so if you are a charismatic lecturer, if you're someone who you have energy for days, your students will latch onto that. And probably you'll see a lot of students, especially in your undergrad classes and maybe even in your general education classes, listen to you, and just because of you and because of how you kind of communicated that material to them, change their major to do what you do, because you just, almost magically transfer that passion to them. It's interesting, and it's a sense of responsibility as well. But significant learning requires that there be some kind of lasting change in the learner that is important in terms of the learner's life. And so I've taken this to mean that it's not necessarily just an inner passion, but it's also that I'm using this online environment to create practical, applicable, lifelong skills that my students can rely on beyond my course and beyond my particular content. So am I teaching them 21st century skills in my class that transcend, for me, the discipline of communication? Are they using are they learning how to use spreadsheets? Are they learning how to use video conferencing tools? Are they learning how to use, collaborative applications like a Dropbox or a OneDrive at Bellarmine or a Google Drive? And, being able to simultaneously edit and look at papers together and work collaboratively in remote environments. Elements that are not just communication related, but in our world, in our day and age, have kind of become prerequisites for most positions. So I want there to be a lasting change. I want there to be something significant within the inner recesses of the learner so that they walk away and something sticks. So let's transition now. So we did kind of a theoretical context. Now we're transitioning very quickly into some practical applications. Again, we're drinking from a water hose tonight. This is going to be a lot of material in terms of, there's going to be a lot of different miscellaneous tips. But ultimately, this is general, and this is kind of very much a bird's eye view. So if you have specific questions, I would encourage you to follow up. So we want our courses to be instructor-led, high teacher presence. I told you that word was going to come up again. Now, When I say instructor-led, I'm actually going to kind of dovetail into the second. I've also used the term today already, facilitator. And for some of you that may make you nervous because you kind of sit there and go, well, if I'm just facilitating learning, then how am I truly the instructor anymore? You still are the leader. You still are the person setting the pace, setting the particular context. You're the one setting expectations. You are still the person who is kind of leading this particular group. And through your presence, you can lead very effectively. So whether that's getting to know your students, whether that's doing constant kind of emails to them, or in my online courses, I utilize a lot of video. And so if that's what you want to do, and if that's kind of how you stay engaged, if you do discussion boards, you can participate actively in the discussion boards. Ultimately, your students need to know that you are present and that you care about them and that you are actually actively engaged in the material. Part of the reason why I do videos, overview weekly videos and video announcements, is because I want my students to know that I'm a real person and not a robot. I want them to know that I am there as an individual. I also do my virtual office hours over video. There's a lot of instructor presence there, specifically where they can see my face. So we do want online environments to be student-centered, so we want to facilitate activities, feedback, guidance. I use the word facilitate because an online environment is different than a face-to-face environment, in that there's a lot more onus on the student to provide kind of a self-pacing. So one of the reasons why students take online courses is because they want something flexible. A lot of our students, a lot of millennial students, 21st century students, work full-time or work multiple part-time jobs just to pay for college. And then also a lot of them have families. We're seeing a transition now as well into the non-traditional student is actually starting to exhibit or exemplify some 21st century student desires. So they want to be flexible. They want to learn at their own pace. They want to figure out how they can kind of take the material and make it most directly relevant to what they do and who they are. So I'd encourage you to think in that regard as well. You are a facilitator, but you are also a leader. So you're establishing the context, but then you're kind of relinquishing your students to say, now it's on you to fulfill these particular obligations, but I'm going to be there along the way, helping with the activities, providing feedback, providing guidance if you have specific questions. So you are not removed from the equation. In fact, I would say that you become an integral part of the equation as you're walking with students as they complete the material. Effective online education is also collaborative. So back in the day, distance learning courses have existed for almost 200 years. I don't know if you knew that, but Isaac Newton actually created correspondence courses a long, long time ago. And so one of the things that we have to kind of think through is that we don't want to do that. We don't want to just create a modern day correspondence course where your students are just kind of sending back and forth a discussion board to you or a paper to you. You can do that. You could do that 150 years ago via the U.S. mail. Instead, we want to take the tools that we have and create a learning community, create a collaborative environment. So many employment opportunities now kind of focus on how do you work with people, especially in remote context, because everything's global. And so we can really help our students by providing activities and different things for them to do that kind of takes them out of their comfort zone as self and kind of engages them with their community at large. You want to maximize flexibility, but provide a pacing framework, foster 21st century skills. I already talked a little bit about that. And then this one's key, and this one's crucial. You want to have a clear and concise format, clear and concise expectations, and instructions as well. I am not creative in terms of graphic design. I do not have an aesthetically appealing bone in my body. How I would decorate our house compared to how my wife decorates our house is drastically different, and I'm lucky that we have paint on the walls if it were up to me. And so when I say, how you design and I'm going to use specifically Moodle or LMS, how you design Moodle is drastically important. It does not mean that it has to be flashy. It doesn't mean even that it has to be pretty. I would argue that simplicity, clarity, and kind of concise expectations and your students knowing exactly what is expected of them as they walk through the process is almost more important, and actually I personally would probably say more important, than the overall aesthetic appeal of kind of what that particular LMS looks like. And then, like we already talked about, you want to account for a variety of learning styles or learning preferences. You don't just want to appeal to one type of student. You want to try to do a lot of things that will appeal to a variety of students. All right, let's keep going. So just to kind of present a little bit of an overview in terms of course design as a whole, we have a lot of different factors and facets that are all kind of maneuvering to make this online environment successful. So it's not just you. You may sometimes feel like you're alone on an island and that you are the only one who's creating this online course or prepping for this online course and that everything boils down to you. But there are other factors involved. So the course design as a whole, so how you've laid everything out, how you've established all of your learning outcomes and learning objectives, how you have positioned your activities and assignments, I would argue in kind of a scaffolding mentality, almost like a competency type, where you're looking at your students and saying, this is what you need to master in terms of either behavior, knowledge, or affect, right? That passion. This is what you need to master before you can move on. So that's your course design, kind of looking at it as a whole and looking at specifics of curriculum. You do have the instructor in there, but I'm not going to focus as much on that because we're going to talk a lot about instructor. One facet here that I hope will kind of reiterate to you that you are not alone is a support system around you, an infrastructure around you, to where you are not the sole person who's answering questions about technology issues. You are not the sole person answering questions about somebody's login not working to get into Moodle. You should have, and thankfully we do have, a technology support center that can answer those questions for students. So one of the things that I try to do ahead of time to be proactive is I try to anticipate as many student questions as possible. And so I despise email with an absolute fiery passion. And so anything that I can do to make sure that my email inbox load is reduced, I try to do that. So even if I get an email question and the student says, I clicked on the link for your lecture, or I clicked on the link for this assignment and it didn't work, immediately I'll go in. First of all, I try to be proactive and test everything out beforehand, but sometimes stuff happens. I go in, fix it, and then immediately do a welcome overview and say, hey, I know some of you may have tried to already open this up, or a welcome video. I know some of you may have tried to open this up. I know that it was broken. It should be fixed now, so there's no need to email me. If you're still having issues, let me know. And I try to anticipate as many student concerns or student questions as possible. But I also do a weekly video or an overview video that kind of talks specifically about our Technology Support Center and how students can contact them and what number to call and when they're available and things that they can help with, so that students aren't emailing me at 3 a.m. and expecting me to answer them at 3 a.m. if they can't turn in an assignment. And then fourth, so as we're looking at kind of this web of course design as a whole, content. And one of the things that I hope will reiterate to you today is that content can be transferred without just you being the oracle. So you can do a lot of different things. You can utilize a lot of different resources. It does not just have to be you talking about a particular resource. So you ultimately, we're going to shift into presence here again. You want to encourage interaction. And I would encourage you to encourage interaction in a variety of different formats. So the low-hanging fruit in online education is discussion boards. And our LMS Moodle will allow you to do discussion boards. And one of the kind of factors, or one of the different applications that we have within Moodle, is you can actually even have your students do video discussion boards. With that, I love that. I actually utilize those a lot because I'm in communication courses, and so I want students to kind of be multimodal, not just oral, written, but also digital communication. I want them all over the map in terms of different life skills. But you want to make sure your students are constantly talking, constantly working together, and constantly also interacting with each other and with you. So if they're only interacting with you, I would argue that's an issue. If they're only interacting with their peers, I would argue that's an issue. You are all kind of creating this classroom climate and this classroom environment, so you want to make sure that you're all interacting. Remember the human element. We've talked about that a little bit. Let me kind of give a little bit of kind of a context in terms of practicalities of what that means for me. So every semester before I teach an online course, first of all, I do just kind of a video bio where I tell my students who I am. I put up some pictures of my family. I kind of talk about my educational background and what I enjoy, different hobbies that I have, reminding them that I'm a human. A couple things that I put in my syllabus that reminds them that I'm human. The first, in any class that I teach, I have a 24-hour policy for email during the week. So Monday through Friday, if you send an email to me, barring drastic circumstances, I will get a response back to you within 24 hours. That's a personal policy that I believe is important, and so I established that. In an online environment, I still have my 24-hour rule. And in my online environment, and this is different from my face-to-face classes, but I actually extend that rule to the weekend. So I say, you will hear back from me within 24 hours, even if you email me on the weekend. That's a best practice. You do not have to do that. My face-to-face class, I typically will say you probably, unless it's an emergency, will not hear back from me on the weekend if you email me. But in my online classes and my hybrid or blended classes, I do allow a little bit of flexibility. And when I encourage you to do interaction and kind of have a high instructor presence, it does not mean that when you enter into the course, you are there for hours and hours and hours at a time. You can go in, pop in, stay for 10 minutes, read over discussion boards, respond to a couple students, respond to a couple emails, pop back out. So it doesn't have to be one of those things where you're constantly in there and you're constantly taking hours upon hours upon hours in your course. You can kind of do this pop in, pop out thing, and if you want to even do that every 24 hours, I think that's fine, as long as you're getting everything accomplished that you need to do. But again, you're human. And so I want your students to know that. I want your students to recognize that and also appreciate that about you as well. You want to build relationships with every student. Here's how I do that. First of all, I email every single student that's going to be in that online course at the very beginning of class. Now, typically, one of the things that I can do is I can create a template, and I just copy and paste the template and can just change the different name. And so they're still getting a personalized email, and then it's not a mass email, but it's the same email. But I just reach out and just kind of introduce myself and to them personally, ask them if they need any questions. I typically will include my contact information in that email. I do virtual office hours in my online courses, and I usually do those via video. And so I kind of allow students to know when that's happening and kind of how they can reach me. I don't provide students my cell phone number. I do provide students my office number. So just know that as well. I know that that's a little bit debated. There are some instructors who have no problems giving their students their cell phone numbers. I don't. But also students know that they can get in touch with me. They just have to think creatively about how to do that. I also will sometimes actually do video personal introductions to students. If I do like a discussion board or where I'm encouraging students to introduce themselves in some capacity to each other, a lot of times I'll take those videos and I'll take snippets out of what the students have already talked about and find points of connection or points of interest and say, hey, oh great, you grew up in Ohio, so did I. And kind of give a little bit of a background in terms of how that student and I are kind of connected. And I do that in my face-to-face classes as well. And then we want to be immediate with response time, but again, I kind of told you what that looked like. Immediate does not mean within 5 minutes, even though that's what your students would desire. That's not realistic and that's not real life. But if you set the expectation at the very beginning, they know what to expect. And I will also say, when I say immediate with response time, I think that this also should apply to grading as well. I also have a policy in my syllabus that holds me to a particular time frame for grading. And I have actually started doing that with individual assignments. So most of my assignments will be 1 week turnaround, and then for larger assignments I say, hey, give me 2 weeks, I'm not just teaching this class, but you will have this assignment back from me within 2 weeks. And I've actually started kind of doing that for just different assignments depending on what we're doing. Some assignments I say, hey, you'll hear back from me within 24 hours. But I outline all of that in the syllabus so that my students know they can go back to that living, breathing document and figure out exactly what I'm doing and why. And I would also encourage you to, again, I'm going to talk a lot about video today, through Microsoft Mix and other applications as well. Microsoft Mix just is kind of the one that I found to be the most user-friendly. You can actually do a video of you walking through your syllabus with your students if you still are so inclined. If you don't trust them to pick up on different things that you want them to pick up, you can put your syllabus up on the screen, you can put yourself in the corner, and you can walk through your syllabus with your students, and you can highlight, you can underline, you can bring their attention to different things. And I would encourage you to do that, just because we cannot necessarily trust students to look at everything themselves. But ultimately this boils down to this word again, be present, be present, be present, be present. So we're going to go over really briefly. These are actually general instructional strategies. If I was working with you on an individual course, I would kind of dive a little deeper and say, hey, this is what this looks like. But I'm going to try to at least give a little bit of an overview of some different things that you can do or different things that our resources allow you to do. So if you do want to do lecture, that's awesome, that's great, that's wonderful. You can actually video directly into Moodle. And so if you are interested in that, I would encourage you to talk to Dr. Apostle. I can also show you how to do that. But you can record videos directly into Moodle. I use that particular application for weekly overview videos and announcements. Videos that aren't very long, that I just need a couple minutes, It doesn't slow Moodle down, it doesn't bog it down, but you can do all of that within Moodle. You never have to leave. You can do, record videos on a camcorder. You can record them on your own phone and then do an upload. Bellarmine uses something called OneDrive, which is kind of like our version of Google Drive or Dropbox. And so you can upload your video into OneDrive and then link to it. You can upload it and link to YouTube, something like that. You can do just a voice recording. Moodle actually gives you an option where you can do just a voice. So if you just got out of bed, hair sticking straight up, and I've done this before, you can just do an audio recording of a lecture if you want to do that. And I thought this was really interesting. I did some pilots of this a couple semesters ago. Students told me that consistently they actually preferred the audio recordings. I hope that's not a slight in terms of just physical appearance, but mostly because they said that they listened to them in their cars when they were either driving to work or coming to campus or wherever they were going. So they were able to listen if I did do a lecture or something where I wanted them to pick up on certain things. They could listen to that no matter their environment. Again, creating flexibility. Bellarmine does have something called the One Button Studio, where you can go in and you will be standing in front of a green screen, so you can manipulate it whenever you go into edit however you would like, but you literally go in, press a button after you've inserted a flash drive, and you can record a lecture if you would like to do that. You have access to that. Your students also can have access to that, so if you are requiring regional students who are close to do presentations, they can utilize that resource as well. Again, I'm going to mention Microsoft Mix again because I do think that's a pretty user-friendly one where you can, all you have to do with Microsoft Mix is download the application. With your bellarmine.edu account, you have access to be able to do that. And so if you have PowerPoints and you want to kind of talk through those PowerPoints with your students, you can do that on Microsoft Mix. So a couple things that we have at our disposal at Bellarmine for you to utilize discussion. We do have Skype for Business. And this is great. And I would actually encourage you to use this. Every .edu Bellarmine account has access to our Skype for Business. And this is basically our version of Google Hangouts or our version of a video conferencing tool. So if you did do something where you wanted your students to meet for a certain amount of time every week, you could bring all of your students into this Skype for Business room. I haven't tested the limits as far as max capacity with that, but most of our classes right now are between 10 and 15. So you can definitely do that within Skype for Business. And you can switch back and forth between presenters and you can kind of have a holistic video conference. One thing that I would encourage you to do, so just in terms of thinking pedagogically about this, if I was going to require my students to meet at a certain period of time, you need to make sure that the registrar understands exactly what's encompassed within this online course if that is your goal. So if you have an online course where every Wednesday from 6 to 8:30 p.m. you meet virtually through video or whatever, you need to make sure that that is explicitly stated in the catalog. And I say that for a couple different reasons. Number one is that I think it will increase retention because students won't drop when they find out that's one of the expectations, and they will, because they'll go, well, wait a second, I thought this was online. But also that prepares your students, and I think that you will see your course evaluations go up because they've kind of been made aware of the expectation ahead of time. Your deans and chairs are already aware of this fact, but on average, you can typically expect your course evaluation numbers to be about a point lower when you teach online compared to when you teach face-to-face. That's industry standard. Does not mean that you're a bad teacher. Does not mean that you flopped. What it means is that this is a little bit of a different modality, but your chairs and your deans understand that, okay? So just know that there are also certain things. One of the reasons why I like to be proactive too is because I see my evaluation scores go up the more proactive I am. So you can do Skype for Business. If you want to do that, if you feel like video conferencing is the way to go for your particular class, I'm fine with that. I would encourage you not to do that, but if you feel like that's the only thing that you can do, that's fine. But I would encourage you to make sure that the registrar knows that and they're able to put that within the catalog. That's crucial. You can use Google Hangouts. You can use discussion forums. Again, I mentioned within Moodle you can do video discussion boards. That's absolutely fine. You can do video responses, just as I mentioned there. But they can't be real time. So it would be that you would post a video, I would go back in later and watch it and respond to you, and you would respond to me, etc. With Skype for Business, everything can be in real time, so we're kind of having an actual conversation. These are great. Moodle also allows you to work collaboratively on papers and assignments and do a couple different things. But ultimately, you just want to make sure that you're, again, creating that community and giving students an opportunity to talk to one You want to make sure that you have flexible activities. So again, when we're meeting every week for 2.5 hours, I would not necessarily say that that's creating an environment of flexibility. Instead, you want to present options for students in terms of being able to do things that they don't have to complete at a particular time. That's crucial. So maybe you want them to go observe, if you're in the School of Education, maybe you want them to go observe one of their favorite professors or one of their favorite teachers from K through 12, and then write a reflection paper on that. Well, that's great. Doesn't have to be done today. But if you give them a week and you say, hey, by the end of the week, I want you to do this, that's creating flexibility. They don't necessarily have to do it in the moment, but they can kind of pre-plan. And then you want to make sure that as you're creating these self-directed activities, that there's also an element of student pacing too. But again, following up and holding students accountable. You do want to make sure that, I use this word very purposefully as well, you are in some ways a mentor. Not just in terms of their learning, but also in terms of how they navigate an online environment. Because many of your students may never have had an online course before. And so you have to almost teach them how to be students in an online environment. So not only are you facilitating their learning, but you're guiding them along this process of how they learn within this particular modality. And so what that looks like practically, if you have students with disabilities, that's going to change what you do. If you have international students who maybe don't have, speak English as a first language, that might change what you do. But you have to ultimately just be prepared for that you are their guide as well as their instructor. And I think we forget that a lot of times in the face-to-face environment, although I would argue that it's true there as well. Collaborative assignments. I incorporate a lot of peer review in my classes, so not just peer review of a paper, but peer review of presentations, peer review of communication strategies or communication audits, where I'm kind of constantly getting different feedback from other students so that, again, I'm not the only oracle, right? We're bringing other people into the conversation and we're saying, yeah, well, I saw this, why don't you improve this differently? I end up learning a lot from that as well because I get to kind of hear other people's feedback and go, oh, I never would have caught that. And then you can also utilize case studies depending on kind of your different area or expertise. I see a lot of nursing faculty utilize case studies, and that's great. So these are just some overview things to think about. If you have specific questions on your particular class, we can meet and talk about exactly what that looks like for your classes specifically. So I'm going to go over these, not quickly, but we're not going to take too long on these. But if you've never heard of Quality Matters, I would encourage you to research them and look them up. Basically, Quality Matters is kind of a governing agency, a governing nationwide body to look at specific assessment of and kind of requirements of effective online learning. One of the things I like about Quality Matters, they have a rubric that kind of helps you design your online courses. I would encourage you to go in and look at that. But these critical course components are specifically from Quality Matters. And I want you to notice something about this. These are not unique to the online environment. You're going to see a lot of these that you probably do in your face-to-face course. It's just going to look a little different, okay? So you do want to have a course overview and introduction explaining what the course entails, timelines, due dates, and you want to be clear on your timelines and due dates. If you change something, you have to change it in your syllabus, you have to change it on the LMS, and then I would also do a video reminding students that I've changed something. They have to be aware of when you change due dates. You want to have clear learning objectives. At Bellarmine, and this probably should be the industry standard, but I don't know necessarily if it is. At Bellarmine, if you teach a face-to-face course and you teach an online course, then at the very beginning of that, your syllabus where you write down your learning objectives for that particular class, they should be the same. Now, how you get there could look drastically different. But the learning objectives, if I'm teaching the same class just in different modalities, the learning objectives should be identical, because we want to create equitable learning environments, okay? You want to have assessment and measurement. I do rubrics for everything. And I still hear faculty who say, I don't like rubrics, I don't understand them, I don't get them. I do rubrics for everything because I want my students to know this is what I expect. And I think that's fair. If I have a supervisor who is going to do a yearly evaluation on me, but I don't know what they're evaluating me on, that would frustrate me. Same thing with a student who doesn't understand what they're being evaluated on when it comes to their learning. And Moodle allows you to do a couple different things with feedback, so you can actually return files to them, so you don't have to print out their file, red ink it, scan it, and email it. You can actually upload it directly to Moodle. You can also do feedback comments, where you can just write comments as opposed to doing a document. You do a lot of different things in that regard, but utilize rubrics. They're your friend. Instructional materials, so you want to have a variety: videos, text, lessons, activities, assignments, rubrics. You want to have all of the instructional materials that you will possibly need as you go throughout this particular process. You want to make sure that you have learner interaction and engagement. So you have to think through, how do you plan on getting the students to interact with each other and then also with you as well? What does that look like? In your ideal world, what would interaction within this class look like? I'm teaching a face-to-face course right now, and it is like pulling teeth getting my seniors to discuss anything in class, and I've never had this before. So I've had to do some drastic rethinking about how I approach discussion with them. Never before have I had to print out and actually write out and print out discussion prompts for class and hand them to my students. This semester I do. And that gets them talking for some reason. When I ask the question orally, they don't. So I have to think through, well, how can I create a more interactive environment, actually get these students to engage? You want to utilize course technology, but let me just say something. You can read that, but let me just say something about the utilization of course technology. This does not mean that you have to utilize everything that is at your disposal. Be purposeful and be intentional. Just because Bellarmine offers something, or just because you found out about a cool technology, does not mean you have to use it. And it does not mean that when you hear everything that I've talked about, you have to go back in and go, oh, I need to do all this stuff. Be you. There's still flexibility for you to do what you do within the classroom. I'm just giving you kind of bullets for your gun, or tools for your toolkit, so that you can kind of sit there and have different resources available at your disposal. You do not have to utilize everything. Play to your strengths, and I would encourage you to utilize a different technology every semester and try something new every time you teach the course, as opposed to trying 10 things that are new all at once. But one of the things that we do have a standard syllabus template for our online courses, and within that, it also talks about specific course technology that your students will have to have. So I would encourage you to pay close attention to that as well, and encourage students before they ever step quote-unquote foot into the class to make sure that they have all the required technology. You want to make sure that there's active learner support. So we have that with our Technology Support Center. And then you also want to make sure that everything is accessible. That's huge. And we don't talk about that enough within higher ed. But you want to make sure that if you have a student with disabilities, that they are also partaking in an equal learning environment as well. Okay? So whether your student might be visually impaired, needs extended test time, etc., you want to make sure that that student is experiencing an equitable and accessible learning environment. Excuse me. So just some miscellaneous tips. I'm going to show you one thing, and then we will be done. Send an introductory email or video. This helps. Kind of creates, again, that human element. List your contact information and support contact information. They will ask you if you do not put it. So put it and save yourself 20 emails. I promise that will help. Consistent visual design and logical content layout can create interactive content, offer up continuous feedback, and have a clear syllabus and LMS connection, which I'm going to show you in just a second. So again, these are just some miscellaneous tips that I've found just help me as I'm going through the process. So I mentioned a clear syllabus and a clear LMS connection. So this is a screenshot of one of my syllabi for a hybrid, keep that in mind, hybrid public speaking course. This is not fully online. And so I did a screenshot because I wanted to show you something in terms of just how my class looks on Moodle. And so you'll see I have everything outlined, specifically what they have to do that week. They're reading the specific assignment, the forum that they have to do. I only do forums 4 times a week in this particular class, or 4 times throughout the semester, not during the week. The videos that they have to write, they have to do a speech critique, etc., etc. So this is my syllabus. My syllabus for my online or hybrid courses is typically, on average, about 3 to 5 pages longer than my face-to-face syllabus. Partly because I want to be overly clear. Because a lot of times, I'm lucky to get my students in face-to-face courses sometimes to ask questions or clarifying questions. But especially in an online environment, I want to be as proactive as possible to try to answer their questions right away. Typically, if I have an assignment that's due, I will do overview videos of a particular assignment, even in my face-to-face classes, so that if my students have questions, they can go back and watch me explain an assignment on video, so that they know exactly what I expect. So here's a screenshot of my syllabus. Here's a screenshot of my LMS. Again, I don't think this is pretty. A lot of white space, a lot of, we have a lot of links because Moodle likes to do that. They like to link from your text to the particular thing. That's great. I don't utilize that a ton. But this mirrors week 4 of my syllabus, right? So there's a very clear connection. Students know exactly what to expect in terms of what is expected of them that particular week, and everything ties in together. So I'm kind of creating this holistic classroom environment. So I want to thank you for taking the time to kind of join with me tonight in learning about online learning. Again, you are not expected to be perfect. You aren't expected to be perfect in a face-to-face environment, so you definitely aren't expected to be perfect your first couple of semesters, especially in an online environment. But hopefully this gave you at least a little bit of fodder in terms of preparing you and kind of creating, if nothing else, some questions or some things that you can kind of sit there and go, oh, I've never thought about that before. But I would encourage you to look at your class and dive deeply into the content and the subject matter that you're teaching and figure out how you can make your class experiential, interactive, and what assignments and activities that you can do to have your students engage with the material, not just hear it from you. You should have access. If you go to Moodle, there is a particular Moodle course called Faculty Distance Learning Orientation that has a lot of different resources. You will see a best practices handbook that goes into a lot more depth on all of this stuff that I've talked about. You will see some different links to Microsoft Mix how-to videos, Google Hangout how-to videos, Skype how-to videos. So I would encourage you to go into that online environment on Moodle and look at those resources. But again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask because we are here to help. Thank you.